Alright, hello everyone, and welcome back to another beat 'em up game tutorial. This tutorial is just kind of going to be a little bit shorter. I'm just going to go over how I program the AI, and I really want to explain my process because I want to make it so that you're able to create your own uh, AI for your game based on what we're going to go over here. So basically, first, let's just kind of understand what our enemy needs. So we want this enemy to run up to the player and punch the player. So for what that needs is we need enemy to move to the player. We need the enemy to stop when near the player. And while the enemy is stopped, we need the enemy to attempt to punch the player. Alright, so that's a very, very simple system. You know, not very crazy there, but that should be easy enough to implement. So how are we going to do that? Well, here in our enemy object, this part is where we're going to code the brains. And I just put a region here so that we can just kind of expand and hide it. And so it keeps everything here contained. So I've set up two temporary variables. The first is distance to player. So this will track how far the player is away from our enemy. And then the player dir. So this is just logging if the player is to the left or to the right. So very simple stuff right there. So basically, we have this horizontal variable, and if you remember, this variable was holding on to whether the player is going right or left. So left, this would be -1. Right, it would be 1. And if neither the right or the left is being pressed, then this variable is 0. So what we're going to do here is we're now going to set this hors variable to the player dir. So this is just going to be left is going to be negative, right is going to be positive, all that good stuff. So if we run the game, we can actually see. So with that simple line of code, we have an enemy that does follow the player. So I'm down here, and then this guy vibrating here is the enemy. And we can punch him a few times, all that good stuff. So there's a few problems. First, he doesn't follow me vertically. Second, he does this thing where he's trying to get to me, but because he has reached my position, he overshoots and then corrects. So it gives this really jarring visual effect that looks awful. So what we're going to do is, I'm going to do a few things. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into create, and I'm going to find the speed variable here. Speed is equal to 20. I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. We want him to move a little bit slower than our player. And then what will we do? So what we're going to do is we're going to say if underscore dist to player. So if our player distance is more than, what should we say? Oh, let's say 300. That might work. So if we're more than 300 pixels away, move towards the player. Alright. Excellent. So as you can see, he not only moves a little bit slower, but he also stops when he's a certain range away. Now there is a problem with this in that our current distance variable only is concerned with both vertical and horizontal distance, when in reality this type probably should only consider horizontal. So what we can do is we can actually set this to 0 and this to 0. So, and this will be the distance to the player horizontally. And then we can make another one that's the distance to the player vertically. Vert. Then we can go ahead and make another variable that's underscore player underscore dir underscore vert is equal to sign obj underscore player dot y minus y. There we go. And we'll rename this as well just to keep everything aligned. Beautiful. Oh yeah, let's change this. So this will be 0, this will be y, this will be 0, and this will be y. Okay. So this will measure the horizontal distance, this will measure the vertical distance, this will measure the direction on the x-axis, and this will measure the direction on the y-axis. So what we want to do is this will only run if our horizontal distance is more than, let's lower this number down, let's do 150. And then what we can do is we can copy this, and our vert variable was set up the same way. So that should control the direction up and down. So we can change this to that, and this to that. Okay. Now it should move towards the player. Alright. So as you can see, the horizontal stuff works fine. Does the vertical stuff? It doesn't seem to be noticing. Maybe we set up a variable wrong here. Okay, so let's see. Yep, that's correct. Player distance. Oh, this needs to be vert. There we go. Horiz vert. Okay, perfect. Yep, follows me up, follows me down, follows me left, and follows me right. That's perfect. That's beautiful. Well, awesome. So now that we have that done, we can actually kick him away like that. And now that we have that done, so what we need to do is that when the enemy is within distance, we want the enemy to wait for a little bit and then punch. So that way, like, the enemy isn't attacking super fast. There's a little bit of time for the player to adjust and all that stuff. So what we're going to do is we can hit X. So basically, I kind of like doing a state sort of machine just to keep everything like aligned. So what we can do is, let me think. So we can just say is out of range is equal to true. And then what we're going to say here is this is equal to true. So we know the player is out of range horizontally, so the player is out of range. And we know that the player is out of range vertically, so the player is out of range. However, if the player is in range, then the player is no longer out of range. And here, then, player is no longer out of range. And then, if out of range. Alright, what I want to do is I want to put the punch on a timer. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a very simple timer variable here. So what we're going to do is make a timer variable. So we'll say punch underscore timer is equal to 30 seconds. So that's like half a second. Punch underscore timer underscore max is equal to punch underscore timer. There we go. Beautiful. And then we're going to say if we're in range and our punch timer is less than 0, we'll set our punch underscore timer to punch underscore timer max. And then that will make our attack true. It's equal to true. Wonderful. So punch timer is equal to punch timer max. Attack is equal to true. Otherwise, then we'll just do punch timer minus minus. Alright. So basically this number will always decrease, and once it's less than 0, then we perform an attack. And it won't always decrease, it'll only decrease if this is false. So if in range. Alright, perfect. Let's see how well that works. Alright, it does seem to be working. Yeah, so now that we're no longer in range, you Seems to be working. However, there's one issue, and the issue is how we set it up. So, like right now, do you see how he's walking and he's punching? So what that is saying is it notices that the player is out of range horizontally. So out of range is set to true. But down here, out of range is also set to true. So how are we going to do this in a way that both of these are true at the same time? Let's just make a nicer, cleaner if statement. And then we can make sure that all this runs correctly there. So what we'll do is we'll just remove this. So basically what this will say is, and for in range horizontally and we're in range vertically, then out of range is false. Otherwise, it is true. And this is going to set out of range to true every step, so we don't actually have to do more here. So this is just a check if in range. There we go. Let's see how that works. Alright, the attack is not being performed. So let's see what we did wrong. Okay, so SB, so we is out of range. So this should actually be true. And then this will actually be false. Alright, there we go. Perfect. Interesting. So this is part of the fact of like designing AI. There's just a bunch of like little quirks to figure out, especially the way I'm doing it. Ideally, I would make more of a switch statement, which is just be like a pile of if statements, like trying to figure all this stuff out to sort this out better. However, what we're going to do is, okay, so it's more than, or. This should actually be or. There we go. So if it's out of range horizontally, or it's out of range vertically, then it is out of range. Otherwise, it is false. So now let's try that, and that should clean it up. Alright, there's an attack. There's an attack. And right now, as it's chasing me, it's not attacking. So that's perfect. That's just what we want. And now we actually have a little bit of a fighting game going on. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an uppercut. So you may have noticed in my other game, the one I'm developing that, is not the tutorial version of this, the Karam Beats 'em Up game, is that Karam will sometimes perform an uppercut. And I believe we should have in our sprites an uppercut sprite set up right here. Excellent. And if it's not in the GitHub, I'll be sure to update the GitHub with the sprite. But this should be the sprite we're using. And so we should have, do we have a state for the uppercut? Let's see if we set it up last time. In air, flying kick. No, we don't. So let's go ahead and set up an uppercut state. So right beneath punch here, I'm just going to write uppercut. There we go. And then we're going to make a new state where we set that up. And it's basically going to be very similar to the punch state. It's the very same idea. So case states dot uppercut break. Alright, hashtag region, hashtag end region. Wonderful. So now we have to set up the sprite for that as well. So we can just go in here and add another sprite. So uppercut, astrophy there, proto, uppercut. Perfect. And now here we're just going to say sprite underscore index is equal to my sprites dot uppercut. There we go. So sprite is implemented, and we're going to want to leave the state. So basically the same thing of what we do. We can actually look at the punch for reference here. So we're just going to copy this stuff. There we go. Beautiful. And paste it there. So this is going to zero out our HSP and VSP. This will make sure that we're on the ground. And when the animation is finished, our state will be the idle state. And that is all working. So the way I do it in my game is if the player lands 3 consecutive punches, then the next hit they perform, will be an uppercut. Here, we'll just do a slightly simpler version. So what we're going to do is we're going to go punches is equal to 0. And we'll go here to the punch state. So here in the punch state, what we're going to do is punches plus plus. So basically every time the punch is performed and we go back to the idle state, punch is going to increase by 1. There's another way to write that there, but I like just writing these 2 plus signs. So the punch state is going to run like that. So now what when we go, we're going to go here to the idle state, and we're going to, alright, so here and here, what we're going to do is, instead of just current state, we're going to put if punches is more than or equal to 3, then go to states dot uppercut. Else do that, and we need this assignment here. Go to uppercut if we've performed 3 punches. So we have to do that here, and actually we should go and update this code down here. So in running, I noticed that there was no hitbox stuff, so that should fix it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the uppercut state. We're going to take this variable, and let's see, right here, when this animation ends, we're just going to set punches back to 0. So that should reset the timer of 3 punches and then an uppercut. So we should be able to see that. Let's see here. Alright, so punch, punch, punch. Yep, do you see that uppercut? Yeah, so then the cycle repeats. Perfect. Let's see. Let me just double check. I don't know. So running, make the hitbox. Nah, that should be fine. Alright. So let's create a thing for that. So we're going to duplicate this uppercut sprite. I'm going to move it into hitboxes. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit the image, add a new layer, red, and here all of this is going to be the hurt zone. Yeah, that's good enough. Now let's go here, and let's set, no, proto uppercut. We're going to call this SPR underscore uppercut score hitbox. Beautiful. Collision mask, and we'll do precise per frame. Excellent. So now we go back to the player, and what we're going to do here is we're going to take this my hitbox and we're going to put it here with the punch. And here, instead of the punch hitbox, we're going to use the uppercut hitbox. Wonderful. So this is what we need. Wait, duck. Oh no. That's wrong. Running. Okay, so this actually needs to be here. I accidentally messed up the state. This was going to the wrong state. So we'll just say cur underscore state is equal to states dot duck enter. Alright, and image underscore index is equal to 0. Alright, that's my bad. That was not supposed to be like that, but that right there should fix it. Alright, so now we're going to take this back to our idle attack. Use here. And we're going to put all of this in there. And then what we're going to do, just to finish it off, in our obj underscore hitbox. So we'll just do case SPR underscore uppercut hitbox. So now what's going to happen is if it's punch, it's going to give the damage type punch. And if it's a uppercut hitbox or flying kick hitbox, we're going to do thrown damage type. So that'll just be interesting. Just make it look nicer. So 1, 2, 3, and nice. That's lovely. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ha, sucks to be that guy. So yeah, that's that functioning. And that's a little bit of a simple combo. There are more complicated ways to do those kinds of combos. This is just like one of the most simple ways. But it does introduce a bit of variety to our combat system. And so yeah. So that is how you code a very simple AI for our enemy. And that is how you create more attacks for our player. So, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely evening.